We all have our pet peeves. Those little things that get under our skin and bring an irrational sort of irritation. It may seem perfectly common occurrences to one person or another, and we can't always describe exactly why these things cause such annoyance. To the onlooker, it can just be an average facet of human nature or a trivial occurrence at best. For me, one very normal act that almost instantly causes me to tense up is when someone, innocently enough, thrusts their phone in my face. It feels almost suffocating being frozen in place while I'm forced to watch whatever video or humorous image they think is so important that I stop whatever I may be doing to stare at their screen. I know this is nothing out of the ordinary, and I'm sure I've put others in similarly awkward situations. The thing is, I was recently forced to watch something that has brought me far more suffering than the claustrophobic discomfort I would normally endure. More often than not, when I have a phone rammed in front of my face, I just zone out and take the time to daydream a bit. Sure, I'll give the token laugh when the wielder of the device chuckles and looks at me in anticipation of shared levity, but it's all a show. Believe me, I'm not actively trying to be rude or anything. It's just a charade I put on to satisfy my attacker's harmless intent. It's especially frustrating if I'm already in the process of enjoying my own chosen entertainment on my own phone. It's like, hey, I see you're doing your own thing, but wouldn't you much rather watch this? Yeah, I don't mean to come off like a holier-than-thou asshole or anything. Yeah, maybe you'll feel inspired to show somebody else this video to share with them what an arrogant prick I may seem, but I can almost guarantee that they likely won't be as into it as you are. I might be getting carried away in trying to describe my annoyance with this newfound habit that many have picked up over the last decade. Who knows? I could be the only one that feels this way. It's not one of those things you can really ask your friends about without setting the stage for a certain degree of defensiveness, especially if you're asking the very people who put you in that position. Either way, my apologies for my abundant rant. This isn't about my bitching and moaning. It all started a couple of months ago. Jamie Diggs, a guy I work with, was on one of his fairly regular tours of showing off his endless collection of Epics Fails videos to anyone he came across. He's a friendly enough guy who's unlikely to ever actively put someone in an uncomfortable position. If anything, he's such a good guy that no one really wants to offend him in any way. So he finally circled my way with an intent etched onto his face. I gave a defeated sigh as soon as he started on his walkthrough, holding his phone out with a smile to anyone in his path. Though I secretly wished I had some work that immediately required my attention, nobody in the room was particularly busy that day. When the chuckling Jamie thrust his device in front of my eyes, barely squeaking out, "You gotta see this," in between his giggles, he was practically wrapped around me, leaving me barely any room to move. I just settled myself into a vague attempt to daydream for the next 4 minutes and 36 seconds of recommended streaming shenanigans. Somewhere in between planning out what I needed to pick up at the grocery store and the boy straddling the railing of a public staircase after falling off a skateboard, I started to notice an unusual reoccurrence amongst the anthologized clips. You know these kind of videos, right? Several minutes of different scenes of idiots falling off of bikes or dancing on tables that break beneath them. There's usually the token girl who's attempting to pole dance in the living room and predictably tips the pole over and crashes to the floor. You may even get the kid tossing the baseball into dear old daddy's cojones. There's really never an abundance of diversity in them, but I can't deny they can be amusing at times. Even though a few of these clips took place indoors, the majority of them are outside. Some in fields, others in backyards. The kid who slid his boys down the railing appeared to be in the city streets. As one clip led into another, I began to notice in every one the same man stood in the background. He seemed quite out of place in his black pinstriped suit that was maybe 3 or 4 sizes too small for him. He wore a wide-brimmed and slightly crumpled top hat tilted down so I couldn't see any of his facial features. He just stood there in the background with both hands on top of the cane he was propped on. While he was no taller or shorter than anyone else, his torso seemed short and stumpy compared to the length of his limbs. His hands were thin and bony, but that could have just been the illusion caused by the sleeves that stopped short about halfway down his slender forearms. It seemed as though nobody else paid attention to the guy in the shrunken suit. Maybe they were just so distracted by the events taking place in front of them rather than anyone else in the crowd. Who knows? I asked Jamie if he could send me the link to the video, which caused his eyes to light up like a 5-year-old birthday boy. I momentarily thought I may have made a grave mistake in this request, as he would surely take it as evidence that I looked forward to viewing many more videos of his choosing. Still, I felt the need to watch the series of clips again, paying more attention from the beginning without someone hovering over my shoulder. It would be later that night before I got a chance to review the link, as my grimacing supervisor demanded that we stash our devices and get back to work. He was a frantic and worrisome man. He would rarely leave his office, but when he did, it was generally to voice his disappointment in his worthless staff. We were used to it, so it was nothing new. I'd almost forgot about the video by the time I arrived back home that evening, settling in to watch the streaming show I'd been binging the last few days. It wasn't until I mindlessly checked my phone for activity, noticing the icon indicating that I had an unread message, that it came back to me. I tapped my thumb on the link and viewed the video in full for the first time. As I had suspected, the unusually dressed man was indeed in every clip. I even noticed him lurking outside the windows or standing in a dark hallway in the background of the indoor scenes. I flipped through a handful of the other videos on the channel, but none of them had any appearances of that particular guest star. They had several hundred videos, and I wasn't about to sit through them all. The one Jamie had sent me was the most recent post from the channel, so I figured it was just some sort of one-off gimmick with the intent of gathering new subscribers or something. When I arrived back at my job the next day, Jamie caught up with me and asked me about the link he sent. Was it as funny the second time? I've watched it like 4 times and it just keeps getting funnier. Not wanting to let him down or disappoint him in any way, I just replied, yeah, good stuff, with a smile. What's the deal with the guy in the suit though? Jamie just raised an eyebrow, looking confused. The guy in the short suit in the background of all the clips. Is he like some sort of gimmick character in these things? My associate just shrugged, looking perplexed. Who? Assuming he had only paid attention to the focal events of the scenes, I pulled the phone out to show him who I was talking about. I'm sorry, man, I just don't see who you're talking about, Jamie said after I pointed my finger directly at the man who was clearly standing in the background. He's right there, I insisted, tapping my index finger on the screen where the image of the man clearly stood. I was inadvertently pausing and unpausing the video with every jab of my forefinger, but it was frustrating me that he refused to acknowledge the guy in the tiny suit. You're messing with me, right? Jamie said, nodding his head. Almost had me going for a second. He laughed, giving me a slap across the shoulder before walking off in search of someone else to talk to. Had he really not seen him? Maybe he was just messing with me. I was a little dumbfounded, but I attempted to shrug it off as a poor attempt at humor on my associate's behalf. The video was still playing on my phone while I stood there pondering the situation. I glanced down at the screen, hovering my finger above it, fully intending to turn off the playback. That was until I noticed the position of the man, whose ankles and gray socks were revealed by his short pinstripe pants, had changed. He still stood alone and unmoving, but he now held his cane in one hand and his head was slightly more raised. I could now see the white skin and unsettlingly wide smile lined with black lips that reached across the lower half of his face. I still couldn't make out his eyes, but a long and pointed nose peeked out from beneath the brim of the top hat, almost overshadowing the eerie grin. The altered stance of the man, combined with the fact that Jamie claimed to have not even seen him, began to make me feel quite unsettled, prompting me to close out the video and stash my phone back in my pocket. Of the remainder of my workday, I showed the anthology of fails to a handful of my other associates. A few of them just blew me off, as Jamie had already shown them the same video the previous day. I still succeeded in convincing a couple of other people to glance at the screen with me for a few moments, but they also claimed to be unable to see the man in the background. Either this was some elaborate setup, perhaps to pay me back for showing little interest in his video recommendations in the past, or something far more strange was going on here. Jamie was never the sort to pull pranks, and many thought very highly of the guy. Honestly, I felt the same way, regardless of his insistence in shoving his phone in my face. Still, it made no sense why I was the only one who could see this particular aspect of the video. The last time I watched the video, it had like 2 million views, so it's not like it was one of those fly under the radar things. It stands to reason that if I'd seen the man, someone else had too. I panned through the comments to see not one mention of the weird guy in the background, but that still didn't mean that I was the only one who had seen him. Maybe, if anyone else could see him, they didn't feel inspired to mention it. I would spend the next few days searching the internet for answers. Sure, there were plenty of stories of men in suits performing ominous acts, but mostly works of fiction or conspiracy theories. I found plenty of articles talking about the men in black who withheld knowledge of otherworldly beings from the public, and I'm sure we've all seen the stories of the tall and faceless, skinny man in the black suit. My search was leading absolutely nowhere, and I was growing steadily more aggravated by the situation. My last-ditch effort was to attempt to contact the people who ran the channel. It took some delving to find a way and get in touch with them, but I managed to track down their Facebook page eventually. I wasn't entirely sure how to approach the subject without sounding like something of a madman, so I typed out and deleted the message several times before feeling comfortable enough to send it. I stared at the words on my computer screen for quite some time before eventually tapping the send icon. This is what the message read. "Hi, I've been watching your channel for a while now, and I just wanted to touch base with you guys about something. I was wondering who the guy in the short black suit is. He appears in the background of just about every clip in your most recent video, and he seems somewhat out of place. I was curious if he's someone who works with you guys, or if all of the clips could have taken place around the same area. I apologize if this is crossing any lines or anything. I'm a student at a film school, and I thought that he could make an interesting character in a project I'm working on. Thank you in advance for any information you could share with me." Sure, the film student thing was a huge crock of shit, but I didn't want to come off like some idiot fanboy full of crazy ideas and the like. I wasn't sure if they'd reply, as channels like these are surely swamped with more messages than they can handle. Unfortunately, reaching out to them was the only idea I had left. I imagined that the best I could hope for was some kind of half-assed reply some weeks later, just something to acknowledge my message and thank me for being a subscriber or something else dismissive. I was quite surprised when I received a reply within an hour of my sending the message. "First of all, thanks for being a subscriber. It means a lot to us when our fans reach out to us, and we strive to make that appreciation known. That being said, whatever you do not keep watching the video. We've made several attempts to pull it from our channel, but it appears to contain some sort of virus that will not allow us to do so. The individual you referred to was not hired by us in any way, nor was he present at any of the events shown in the clips. I sincerely apologize that you are among the few who can see him, but I highly recommend that you pursue this no further. Though we appreciate your support and value our subscribers, it would be in your best interest not to watch this video again." I can't say this reply helped my confusion in the slightest, but it did give me something. I was not the only one who could see the man in the shrunken suit. The warning that I was given not to watch the recording again only made me even more curious. I'm sure they had a good reason to recommend against it, but it's just a video, right? I can't imagine another viewing would lead to anything substantially bad. After all, my curiosity had taken me this far. I couldn't just walk away from it now that I had confirmation that what I saw was real. He actually moved this time. He wasn't just standing in the background anymore, but progressively moving forwards towards the foreground. He slowly approached the boy straddling the railing. He began to raise the window of the room in which the failed pole dancer crashed to the floor. He even trudged across the mud in the direction of the guy who flipped his dirt bike. Every clip showed the man steadily walking closer to the central character in each scene. He wouldn't reach them by the time each clip closed and another began, but I couldn't help but wonder what would happen when he did. Should I watch it again? I wondered. No, not today. Not yet. I tried to reply to the Facebook message to ask specifically why I shouldn't rewatch the footage. I wouldn't hear back from them this time, but I think I expected that. To be honest, the way the man in the small suit moved made me feel quite uncomfortable. His movements didn't flow the same way as the rest of the footage did. There was a jerkiness to his actions, almost similar to the way people moved in the old silent movies. There was a strange sort of graininess and an unusual texture to his appearance too, something I hadn't noticed before. It could be that he was somewhat poorly superimposed into the clips. Perhaps his appearance was similar in nature to those images that could test the levels of color blindness, where only certain people could see the number hidden in the blots. My theorizing settled my curiosity enough for the time being, so I tried not to think about it anymore. Having pushed the images far into the back room of the storage facility in my mind, I decided it would be best for me to just drop the matter altogether. I had already spent way too much valuable time dwelling on it already, and I planned to just get back to some semblance of normality. That's what I told myself anyway. Over the following days, no matter how much I worked to keep myself distracted, my mind kept wandering back to the man in the video. I would absent-mindedly pick up my phone from time to time and find myself wanting to check the link. Finally, I just made the decision to remove temptation and just delete the damn message. Similarly to what was inferred in the Facebook message, I seemed unable to delete the thing. It would spin with the little in progress icon for a time, but ultimately it would not remove it from my device. That only frustrated me even more, as I'd already spent far too much time dwelling on this ridiculous thing. I made one final attempt to delete the chat box entirely when the video just started playing, seemingly of its own volition. I didn't even tap the damn link, only the message box itself. This shouldn't have caused the damn thing to activate. I tried to close the video, and when it didn't work, I attempted to shut down my phone, to no avail. Finally, I said to hell with it as my frustration began to flood my face with warm blood. I slid off the back panel of my very outdated device and removed the battery before slamming it face down onto the table. I let out a heavy sigh with my pulse racing much quicker than such a thing should warrant. I couldn't say why I was so worked up at the time. I had no reason to believe this would fail to stick a fork in the unyielding determination of the seemingly cursed video. That was until I heard the sound of the ambient background music from the clip, which had still found its way to begin its playback. I flipped the phone back over to face me, and sure enough, the kid was sliding his junk down the railing again before my eyes. I was stunned. How the hell could this be happening when the battery was lying on the desk a good foot away from the phone? I watched on in horror as the man in the tight-fitting and wrinkled suit took exaggerated steps and long, jerky strides towards the kid on the railing. He looked like a cartoon character comically creeping up on his prey, as though a freshly lit stick of dynamite would soon be whipped out from his back pocket. The boy stayed perched on the railing as everything but the approaching man appeared to have become frozen. The timestamp on the clip had even stopped at 43 seconds. I couldn't look away. The man finally reached the boy on the public stairway banister, tossing his cane to the ground. He reached out, wrapping his long and bony fingers around the kid's legs before lifting his head to face the camera. His almost hilariously spherical eyes, with tiny black pupils in their center, felt like they gazed directly into mine. I could now make out the thin and curled sketch of a mustache on his short upper lip, above his wide and perfectly white teeth of menacing, stretched-out grin, still surrounded by the glossy black lips. While we stared at each other, he just pulled down on the legs of the straddling teenager, slowly splitting the body around the railing. Thick, dark blood sprayed across the screen while he separated one side of the body from the other. The background music gave way to the slushing and splatting sounds of the poor kid's insides spilling out onto the concrete. When both halves of the boy finally slapped onto the pavement on either side of the crimson pool of blood and guts, the screen went black, and the phone lay lifeless on the table once more. My hands were shaking violently as I exhaled a heavy and trembling breath. I didn't even realize that I'd been holding my airflow this whole time, my head feeling light and dizzy from the restricted flow of oxygen. I felt my throat clench around the lumps that threatened to push upwards and out of my mouth. "What the fuck?" I stuttered, my whole body quaking beneath my skin. I was afraid to even touch my phone with the fear that if my hand so much as lightly brushed up against it, the next clip would begin to play out before me. I dreaded to think what havoc the man in the pinstripe suit would unleash next. I stood up to prop myself on legs that felt like shivering gelatin wrapped around little more than fragile toothpicks. I backed away from the dark screen that stared blankly at the ceiling as if it would leap back into my hand at any moment. I just ran. I ran out of my apartment and headed straight for the stairs. The idea of standing still in the elevator with nothing to occupy my erratic thoughts but the grotesque display of maniacal violence and gore I'd witnessed was the last thing I needed. I sped towards the door while my mind raced significantly faster than my still gelatinous legs. My spinning head was mostly checked out and otherwise occupied during my exit, causing me to stumble across the threshold of the door to my apartment building, damn near sending me face first into the sidewalk. I ignored the chuckling passers-by as I shakily found my footing, speeding in between and around them the second I was able to. Sometime later that day, I arrived back home after picking up a new cell phone. I was well overdue for an upgrade as it was, so this seemed like a perfect time to stop putting that off. It may seem a little over the top, but I grabbed my old device with some tongs, keeping it outstretched before me, afraid to even glance at the damn thing. I slowly walked to my small fireplace, my heartbeat quickening with every step, dropping the phone onto the charred wood the second I was close enough. I squirted lighter fluid across the now cracked screen, lit a match, and tossed it in. I gazed on while the plastic began to bubble and melt, the thin strip of glass splitting and cracking from the blaze. I let out a long sigh before returning to the bag in which my new device awaited me. I finished setting everything up, removing Jamie's number from my backed-up contact list. Over the next few days, I still felt uneasy, as though the video had left a stain on my subconscious I couldn't shake. Once another week had passed by, life seemed to have returned to its normal and uneventful routine. No more dwelling on bizarre links or the mysterious guest stars they may or may not contain. I did tense up when Jamie made his tour of the office, brandishing his phone for all to see. Before I could give him the opportunity to thrust his screen in my face, I fled to the sanctuary of the bathroom. Better to avoid any more uncomfortable viewings if I could. Luckily, he had finished his sweep by the time I returned to my desk, and the day played out like many others before it. I only wish that I hadn't turned on the TV when I got home that evening.
Drake Fillmore, a popular skateboarder whose videos have inspired many across streaming platforms, died late last night.
The newscaster read aloud from the teleprompter.
The details of the incident that took his life are being withheld from the public at this time. Witnesses have described the freak accident as horrifically bizarre, while some were reported to have fainted at the sight.
Though I already had little doubt about who he was in life, I still felt my guts churn when the image of the boy who had straddled the railing appeared on the screen. He was older than he was in the video, but it was definitely the same person. I just sat there slack-jawed in front of the television, barely aware of when they moved on to the next topic of the day. Could this video montage of slips and falls really have somehow led to the real-life death of an innocent kid? My reeling thoughts were interrupted by the buzzing vibration of my newly acquired phone. I absentmindedly reached for the device while still staring at the TV screen. The newscaster droned on with whatever information he was prompted to, but I was still in a daze from the previous segment. I clicked the button on the side of my phone, swiping my thumb up and across the screen. Rather than break my unblinking gaze from before me, I raised the device to meet my eyes. I tapped my thumb on the new message alert, my stomach lurching at the sight of an unknown number with a video link attached. I gently set my phone back down on my old weathered wooden coffee table. I knew what would happen if I made any attempt to delete the message. I refused to allow it the opportunity to replay the video I swore I would never watch again. I dreaded to think what the man in the shrunken pinstripe suit had planned for the unsuccessful pole dancer. She was the star of the clip that followed the skateboarder. I just stared at the device laying face down on the table for some time, scared to make any sort of sudden movement. When I heard the video begin to play again, something that I had a feeling it would do the second I saw the link, I whipped the phone back up from the table and threw it into the fireplace. I heard the screen shatter when it landed only inches from the dried glob of melted plastic. I repeated the same ritual sacrifice I had performed on his predecessor, listening on as the small speaker strained and popped, before giving way to nothing more than the crackling sounds of the fire. It had been many years since I lived without the company of a phone. I would find myself reaching into my pocket from time to time, only to find loose lint or occasional spare change waiting. It felt similar to how I imagined phantom limb syndrome to be when my absent mind would command my thumb to flip through random websites that were once no further away than the tip of my finger. This was just muscle memory that I hoped would dissipate soon enough. I never realized how often I would reach for the damn thing. So many hours of otherwise boring and tedious time that could easily be filled by convenient access to the World Wide Web. It took some adjustments to get used to life without the internet at my fingertips, but it was far better than the alternative. I would still practically run from the room when Jamie would approach with his enthusiastic chuckles, holding his phone out like the Olympic torch. It had been several weeks since I abandoned life with a smartphone, and I refused to watch the news anymore out of fear of seeing familiar faces having faced a brutal and painful death. I had little doubt that whether I watched the video or not, the man in the top hat and shrunken suit would still find his victims. This knowledge was my burden to bear, but most days I could just add it to the long list of other atrocities in the world I hoped to never witness. My life got back into a routine, and after some time I no longer reached for the phantom device that used to rest snugly in my pocket. My brief moment of peace would be short-lived, however, when I was so involved in my work one day, I didn't notice my approaching colleague. It was only days ago, after I had already begun to write this down, when I found Jamie's phone thrust in front of my face for the last time. "You're famous!" he exclaimed, laughing out loud. The video had already progressed to its midway point before he shoved it in my face. I watched on with my mouth agape as I saw familiar events play out from a far-removed perspective than I remembered them. The view from the crowded sidewalk showed me clumsily exiting my apartment building. My feet met the threshold of the door, almost toppling me to the ground while the audience roared with laughter. As I watched myself flee from the scene, I noticed an arm propped on the ledge of the open window of a taxi, parked on the side of the road. The pale fingers tapping on the yellow-painted door, the long thin wrist that led to the bony elongated hand, was protruding from a short black pinstriped sleeve. "Why are you showing me this, Jamie?" I asked coldly. "Huh? Come on, man, it's funny. Why do you keep showing me this shit, Jamie?" I swatted the phone out of his hand, getting to my feet. "Hey," he said as I turned to walk away, every eye in the room fixed on us. "What the hell, man?" I was almost at the exit when he retrieved his phone from the floor, inspecting the screen for damage. "I only wanted to share," he called out while I pushed through the door. I haven't left my apartment since I got home that day. I have no idea how whatever is likely to come will play out, but I have a feeling the dead pulled on my door won't prevent it from happening. All I know for certain is that I'm fucking terrified. I have little doubt that somewhere out there is watching that damned video right now, witnessing the man in the crumpled top hat and shrunken pinstriped suit drawing closer and closer to me. I can't deny that part of me hopes that it's Jamie who's able to see him this time. Yeah, it may seem a bit petty, all things considered, but I think it's only fair. He's the one that damned me to this potentially gruesome fate in the first place. Does it make me a bad person to want him to join me on this? It's like he told me. I only want to share.